Cole Mercer lay prone on the sun-bleached concrete, the rifle's bipod steady against the rooftop's edge, his breathing a quiet, practiced rhythm that matched the slow drift of dust across the abandoned skyline. The city below him was a maze of fractured towers and gutted streets, a place once alive with traffic and voices, but now owned by the Aurelian occupiers whose banners snapped from every surviving structure. He had been on this rooftop for 18 hours, shifting position only when the light changed or when his instincts told him the alien sensors were sweeping too close. Fatigue whispered at him, but he ignored it. Discipline was the anchor that held him steady. Discipline and the knowledge that he was the last line of protection for the scattered civilians still trapped in the sector. Cole's earpiece crackled sporadically, but no commands had come through since dawn. Central Command had given him one directive before the channel went silent: hold position until green light. He repeated the phrase in his mind whenever impatience tried to claw its way forward. Orders meant survival. Breaking them meant losing the fragile thread of strategy the human resistance was barely clinging to. Still, the absence of communication felt heavy, like storm clouds building behind his ribs. He lifted the scope to his eye and swept across the distant rooftop of the Aurelian administrative tower. The aliens had landed a new cluster of officers earlier that morning, their shuttle's descent loud enough to rattle loose debris around him. The officers strutted across the platform in glittering armor plates, though many of them had already removed their helmets. To them, Earth's remaining defenders were little more than a nuisance, primitive mammals with crude weapons. Their arrogance radiated across every gesture, every sharp-edged laugh that carried across the city on their amplified vocalizers. Cole watched them like he watched the weather, carefully, analytically, without emotion. But deep beneath the surface, something coiled tight. The Aurelians had spent days broadcasting taunts, calling human marksmen relic snipers and frightened rooftop ghosts. The insults didn't bother him, but what they revealed, complacency, was dangerous. Not to him, but to the people trying to survive in the shattered blocks below. One officer in particular, tall even for an Aurelian and draped in a sash indicating high rank, walked to the edge of the platform and lifted a communicator toward the city. His voice boomed across the ruins, translated automatically into English. To the human hiding among these rooftops, come down and face us with honor. Your little rifle cannot harm us. You cling to outdated traditions, using weapons that belong in museums. We wonder, do you tremble each time we speak? Cole felt the words strike the air around him like pebbles tossed into still water. He stayed motionless, his finger resting along the rifle's frame, not yet near the trigger. Let them talk, he thought. Let them draw lines in the air with their boastful hands. Every movement, every careless gesture only sharpened the mental map he was constructing of their vulnerabilities. He shifted slightly, adjusting his angle so he could see the streets below the tower. A group of civilians, thin, frightened, herded like livestock, were being pushed toward a holding zone by alien soldiers. Cole's jaw tightened as he observed the scene, but he forced himself to stay rational. If he fired without authorization, the aliens might retaliate against those people before reinforcements could arrive. He lifted his radio again. Shadow point to Central. Civilians at risk near Tower 6. Requesting engagement authorization. Only static answered him, followed by a faint beep that signaled the network's instability. No denial, no approval, nothing. Cole exhaled slowly, the breath threading through clenched resolve. He knew he couldn't act yet, but every part of him was wound tight with anticipation. The situation was shifting, pushing toward a breaking point he could almost feel in the tension of the air. He settled back into position, eyes locked on the Aurelian officers as they resumed their smug strutting. The city stretched beneath him, scarred, silent, waiting, and Cole waited with it, ready for the moment when the green light finally came. Cole remained on the rooftop as the sun dipped lower, casting long, skeletal shadows across the ruins. The Aurelians had grown bolder with each hour of occupation, striding openly through the district as if daring any remaining human defender to challenge them. Their officers moved with an ease that unsettled Cole, not because he envied their confidence, but because confidence made them unpredictable. Overconfidence made them dangerous. He noted their patterns with meticulous care, tracking the rhythm of their patrols, the way they communicated through hand signals and flickers of colored light along their armor. Every detail mattered. Every gesture hinted at a structure of command he needed to understand. Below, the human resistance was scattered across broken districts, fighting to preserve pockets of life rather than reclaim territory outright. Cole knew the city far better than most of them. He had grown up here, trained here, and watched it fall piece by piece. His role was not to lead charges or clear streets, but to protect evacuation lines for families still hiding in the labyrinth of collapsed apartments and overturned transit trams. From up high, he could guide their movement with precision, intervening only when absolutely necessary. Every round he fired had to count. Every decision had to be flawless. His earpiece sputtered again, the static momentarily forming a pattern he almost mistook for a voice. He tapped the casing, trying to coax clarity from the failing connection, but the channel dissolved into silence. The lack of communication from Central Command gnawed at him. It wasn't fear. He had long ago learned how to live with that, but the uncertainty pulled at his nerves. Without explicit authorization, he was pinned between obligation and instinct, each urging him in different directions. Across the plaza, the Aurelian officers reassembled for what looked like another spectacle. They arranged themselves in a semicircle near the administrative tower, gesturing to hovering drones that projected shimmering holograms above their heads. The images formed crude caricatures of human soldiers, wide-eyed, trembling, tripping over their own weapons. The officers laughed, a harsh, metallic sound amplified by their suits. Even from a distance, Cole could feel the disdain radiating off them, a collective sneer directed at an enemy they believed had already been beaten. He studied them with renewed focus, his gaze lingering on small details. How the highest-ranking officer stood slightly apart from the rest, how the junior staff mimicked his posture, how the drones drifted in synchronized arcs at predetermined intervals. Their arrogance gave him a blueprint. Every creature revealed its nature when it felt invincible. The Aurelians were no exception. Cole shifted his attention downward when movement caught his eye. A cluster of civilians had emerged from a nearby building, escorted by human resistance volunteers trying desperately to shepherd them toward a safer alley. Cole recognized the signs immediately. Hesitant body language, hurried steps, glances upward as if expecting danger. The volunteers were brave, but they were exposed. If the aliens noticed them, there would be no mercy. Cole adjusted his scope, tracking a patrol team, inching dangerously close to the group. He raised his radio again, voice low and urgent. Shadow Point reporting civilian movement near Tower 6. Patrol closing in. Reconfirming request for engagement authorization. He waited, straining to catch even the faintest response. Nothing came. Only the oppressive quiet of a channel barely clinging to life. A muscle twitched beneath his eye as he weighed the consequences of acting without orders. He could end the patrol with 3 precise shots, maybe 2 if he accounted for wind drift. But killing them outright would expose the civilians to retaliation if more aliens arrived before they could escape. He ground his teeth, frustration simmering beneath practiced composure. On the platform, the alien officers began a new round of mockery, this time gesturing theatrically toward Cole's building. They didn't know he was there. They simply assumed some desperate sharpshooter might be listening. Their voices carried across the rooftops, dripping with derision, describing humans as fear-bound creatures hiding in ruined nests. Cole kept his breathing steady, letting their insults flow past him like water over stone. Yet his patience thinned as the patrol moved closer to the civilians. His pulse remained even, but the pressure behind his calm intensified. He couldn't fire. Not yet. But the moment for restraint was shrinking, tightening into something sharp and inevitable. He tracked both groups, the mockers and the threatened, his mind balancing the threat landscape with clinical precision. The situation was approaching a point where decisions would no longer wait for authorization. Something was coming. He felt it in the air, in the way the city seemed to hold its breath. And as Cole shifted his weight to keep the patrol in sight, he sensed that the next few minutes would decide everything. The radio hissed again, but this time the static broke apart with a clarity sharp enough to freeze Cole mid-breath. A clipped voice pushed through the distortion, strained but unmistakably human. Shadow point, green light granted. Priority targets, command officers. Repeat, green light. The message dissolved into crackling fragments before he could respond, but it didn't matter. Authorization had come. The waiting was over. A focused stillness settled over him, washing away every frustration and doubt. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, the metal warm from hours of contact, and felt his mind sharpen into the singular purpose he had been trained for. The alien officers on the administrative tower continued their spectacle, entirely oblivious to the shift that had just occurred. They moved in a loose arc, laughing at their holographic illusions, dissecting human behavior as if discussing a primitive species in a research lab. Their gestures were expansive, careless, as though the empty sky itself protected them. Cole studied the spacing between them, the slight differences in height, the angle of their neck plating, the glint of reflected sunlight off exposed armor vulnerabilities. Every variable aligned in his mind, forming a lattice of possibilities. He drew a slow breath through his nose, allowing the rhythm to steady his heartbeat. He selected his first target, the high-ranking officer who had taunted the city earlier. The alien stood at the center of the platform, issuing orders with a flourish that suggested absolute control. Cole dialed his scope, compensating for the mild crosswind sweeping between buildings, and let his muscles sink into the familiar posture of imminent action. There was no anger, no exhilaration, just precise intent. He exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked with a controlled recoil. A heartbeat later, the officer staggered, the upper ridge of his armor erupting in a spray of fractured plating. He toppled backward, his collapse abrupt enough to jolt the remaining officers into startled silence. Cole watched them freeze, their expressions tightening with disbelief. Then the panic began. Aurelian soldiers scrambled across the platform, shouting in their own language, scanning the rooftops with frantic motion. Cole had no intention of staying where they expected him to be. He slid backward from his firing position, packed his rifle against his chest, and moved with swift, practiced efficiency across the rooftop. Every relocation was a dance of balance and precision, slipping between vents, ducts, and structural ridges. By the time the aliens had oriented themselves toward his original perch, he was already prone behind an old ventilation stack 20 meters away. He reacquired their positions through his scope. The aliens clustered tightly now, abandoning their earlier bravado in favor of nervous proximity. That made them easier targets. Cole chose another officer, one attempting to rally the others with wide, frantic gestures. He timed his shot with the rumble of a passing drone overhead, letting the mechanical hum mask the faint echo. The round struck cleanly, dropping the officer before the group could react. Chaos fractured their unity. The Aurelians responded with erratic fire, plasma bolts scorching the rooftops in wide, desperate arcs. They had no idea where the threat was coming from. Cole moved again, confident yet cautious, each shift designed to compound their confusion. His breathing remained even, his thoughts crisp. These were the moments he had trained his entire adult life for, not for glory, but for necessity. As he settled into a new vantage point, he noticed one alien who hadn't panicked. This officer moved differently, calculated, observant, scanning not for motions but for patterns. He directed the others with sharp commands, maintaining structure despite the mounting fear. Cole recognized intelligence when he saw it. This one was dangerous. He prepared another shot, but the officer abruptly ducked behind a column, denying Cole a clean line. Cole adjusted, tracking him with patience. The rooftop echoed with the disarray of alien forces, their composure unraveling as each passing second exposed their vulnerability. Cole steadied himself for the next opening. The tide was turning, but the operation wasn't finished. Not until command control was fully dismantled. And as he watched the remaining officers struggle to reorganize, he knew the most critical moment still lay ahead. Cole kept the calculating officer in his sights, waiting for the moment when hesitation or necessity would force the alien to reveal himself. The battlefield had shifted entirely. The once composed Aurelian command unit was now a scattered collection of frantic shapes darting between cover points they had never expected to need. Their earlier mockery had dissolved into shouts of alarm that echoed across the rooftops. Cole could sense their unraveling, but he also understood that desperation bred unpredictability. He couldn't afford complacency, not now, not with civilians still trying to slip through the district's broken alleys. The officer he had marked reemerged at last, edging along the side of a damaged comms terminal with measured care. Cole tightened his focus, but before he could line up the shot, a cluster of drones rose suddenly from behind the tower. These models were smaller than the broadcast units, sleeker, built for reconnaissance and counter-sniper action. Their sensors pulsed with scanning beams, sweeping across rooftops in expanding arcs. Cole suppressed a curse. The aliens had adapted quickly, faster than he preferred. The drones began triangulating potential firing points based on trajectory analysis, and although their calculations were crude compared to human ballistic software, they were narrowing possibilities with alarming speed. Cole slid backward, hugging the rooftop's natural contours, staying beneath the drones' scanning fields. He knew the city's architecture intimately. He trained on these very rooftops years before the occupation. The reflective surfaces of old HVAC panels created natural distortions for optical sensors, while the angled ductwork produced false positives when scanned. Using these obstacles like pieces on a board, Cole maneuvered between them with deliberate timing. The drones swept past him, their beams disrupted by the metallic clutter. He reached a narrow gap between two rusted pipes and positioned a reflective shard of glass at just the right angle to produce a signature that mimicked a rifle barrel. A moment later, the drones fired a salvo of sizzling plasma at the decoy, lighting the rooftop in harsh blue flashes. The distraction bought him seconds, enough for him to swing around behind a square maintenance structure and prepare a clear shot toward the officer, now issuing frantic commands to the drone operators. Cole inhaled, letting the noise of the drones fade into the background. The alien raised his arm to gesture toward the disturbance, exposing a vulnerability along the seam of his armor. Cole fired. The officer collapsed instantly, his body hitting the platform with a heavy thud. The remaining soldiers faltered, leadership shattered beyond repair. With their command structure gone, the Aurelians' cohesion dissolved entirely. Some attempted to retreat toward the tower's inner stairwell. Others fired wildly into the air as if they could intimidate an invisible enemy into revealing himself. Their panic spread downward to the troops patrolling the streets, who quickly lost any semblance of coordinated movement. Cole watched the breakdown with wary focus. Victory was close, but chaos had a way of spiraling into danger for anyone caught in its path. Movement below signaled the arrival of human resistance units advancing through newly opened channels. They moved fast, exploiting the confusion, clearing intersections with quiet efficiency. Cole spotted the civilians he had been monitoring earlier being ushered into a safer zone by the volunteers. His chest eased with a relief he didn't allow to reach his expression. He kept scanning for threats, refusing to let emotion dull his awareness. One last drone hovered near the administrative platform, its movements slow and uncertain without clear directives. Cole tracked its flight path, calculating angles. When it rotated to align with him, he fired a quick, precise shot that shattered its core processor. The machine spiraled downward, crashing beside the fallen officers. Silence gradually replaced the frantic commotion. Smoke drifted from scorched metal, curling through the thinning light as the city exhaled a long, exhausted breath. Cole rose from his position, stretching stiff muscles, and moved toward the rooftop's edge. Below, resistance fighters signaled victory, their voices muffled but unmistakably triumphant. Cole surveyed the reclaimed district. It was still broken, still scarred, but undeniably theirs again. He set his rifle across his shoulder and looked toward the horizon where the next battle surely waited. The city was far from saved, but this sector, this moment, belonged to humanity. And as he stepped back into position, ready to watch over those who still needed protection, he whispered words meant for no one but himself. His quiet affirmation of duty, resolve, and home.